I'm sitting here at 2 a.m. trying to make sense of what my life has become over the past few months, and honestly, I don't even know where to start. Maybe writing this all out will help me figure out what to do next, or maybe I'm just losing my mind. Either way, here goes nothing. I'm 24, just graduated from Columbia Law School this past May. Yeah, that's right, Columbia. I busted my ass for 7 years to get there and get through it. Started at a state school for undergrad, worked two jobs while maintaining a 3.8 GPA, studied for the LSAT like it was my religion, and somehow managed to score 172. And when I got that acceptance letter from Columbia, I literally cried in the parking lot of the Wendy's where I was working at the time. The thing is, my family isn't exactly rolling in money. My dad works as a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing plant, making decent money, but nothing crazy. My mom's a substitute teacher. They've got my sister Stella, who's 22, and she's always been the golden child. Not to sound bitter, but it's just facts. Stella was the cheerleader, the homecoming queen, the one who could do no wrong. Me? I was the bookworm who spent Friday nights studying instead of going to parties. When I got into Columbia, I knew the financial situation wasn't great. Tuition alone was like $75,000 a year, not counting living expenses in Manhattan. I applied for every scholarship, grant, and fellowship I could find. I managed to get about $40,000 covered through merit scholarships and need-based aid, but that still left me with roughly $200,000 in student loans by the time I graduated. Not ideal, but I figured it was an investment in my future. Here's where things got messy. About 6 months before graduation, I started job hunting. The legal market is brutal right now, but I managed to land a few interviews at mid-sized firms in New York. Nothing big law crazy, but decent positions that would pay around $180,000 starting. Not enough to live lavishly in Manhattan, but enough to start chipping away at those loans and maybe even help my family out a bit once I got established. Around February, I had what I thought was my final interview at this corporate litigation firm. The partners seemed to like me. My grades were solid. And I had good recommendations from professors. I was feeling optimistic. That's when my parents called me up and asked if we could have a serious conversation about money. I drove home that weekend thinking maybe they wanted to talk about how I could help with household expenses once I started working. Instead, they sat me down in the living room, basically told me they were broke. Not just tight on money, actually broke. My dad explained that they'd been struggling to keep up with the mortgage payments for the past 2 years. They had about $15,000 in credit card debt, and they'd borrowed against his 401k to cover Stella's college expenses. Then came the kicker. They asked if I could defer starting work for a year and move back home to help them figure things out financially. They suggested I could maybe work part-time at a local law office or something while helping them negotiate with creditors and get their finances back on track. They said they were financially tapped and couldn't support themselves anymore, let alone help me transition into my career. I felt horrible. Here I was, their kid who just spent 3 years at an expensive law school, and they were asking me to put my career on hold to bail them out. But they're my parents, I love them. And the thought of them losing their house was terrifying, so I said yes. I turned down the job offer I was expecting to get, withdrew from the other interview processes, and started making plans to move back to my childhood bedroom. The job offer came through about a week later, $185,000 starting salary, good benefits, clear path for advancement. I had to call them and explain I couldn't take the position due to family circumstances. They were understanding, but obviously disappointed. These opportunities don't come around every day, especially for someone from my background. I graduated in May, moved back home immediately after. The plan was for me to take the bar exam in July while also helping my parents sort out their financial mess. I spent June studying for the bar and reviewing all their financial documents. It was worse than they'd initially let on. They were 3 months behind on the mortgage. Credit card minimum payments were eating up almost 30% of my dad's income, and they had basically no emergency savings. I took the bar exam at the end of July and spent August putting together a comprehensive financial recovery plan for them. I negotiated with their mortgage company to get them into a loan modification program, worked out payment plans with their credit card companies, and helped them create a realistic budget. It was exhausting and honestly pretty depressing, but I felt like I was making a difference. Here's where everything goes completely sideways. In September, about 2 months after I'd moved back home, Stella calls the house in tears. She's been living in California, supposedly working as a social media manager for some startup. Though none of us ever really understood what her job actually involved, she explained that she'd gotten involved in this amazing investment opportunity through some friends she'd made out there. The way she described it, it was this revolutionary new cryptocurrency platform that was supposedly going to transform how people invest in green energy projects. She said her friends had been making incredible returns, like 30% monthly returns, and they'd convinced her to invest her savings. Not just her savings, though. She'd somehow convinced my parents to liquidate almost everything they had and give her the money to invest on their behalf. I'm sitting there listening to this phone call, and my blood is just getting colder and colder. She's explaining how the platform suddenly shut down overnight, all the money is gone, and it turns out the whole thing was a Ponzi scheme. The friends who got her involved had apparently disappeared, and there was already talk of federal investigations. The amount? $150,000, every penny my parents had managed to scrape together, including the remaining balance in my dad's 401k, a small inheritance my mom had received from her aunt earlier in the year, and money they borrowed against their life insurance policies. All of it gone. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 2 months earlier, they were telling me they were financially tapped and couldn't support themselves. They'd asked me to sacrifice my career to come home and help them, and now I find out they somehow had $150,000 sitting around that they just handed over to my sister for some obvious scam investment. The worst part was how they explained it to me afterward. They said Stella had been so excited about this opportunity, and she'd convinced them it was a sure thing. She told them they could solve all their financial problems and even help me pay off my student loans with the returns. They saw it as a way to fix everything for the whole family. They never told me about it because they wanted it to be a surprise. I was furious. Not just disappointed or frustrated, actually angry in a way I'd never been at my parents before. I'd given up a $185,000 job, moved back into my childhood bedroom, spent months of my life trying to fix their financial problems. Meanwhile, they'd had enough money to potentially solve everything, but instead chose to gamble it away on some cryptocurrency nonsense. The situation got even worse over the next few weeks. My parents were now facing actual bankruptcy. With their savings gone and no way to catch up on their mortgage payments, they were looking at losing the house within a few months. Credit card companies were threatening legal action, and my dad's employer had started asking questions about why he'd borrowed so much against his retirement account. That's when they came to me with their next request. Since I just passed the bar exam and would be licensed to practice law soon, they wanted me to represent them in a lawsuit against the cryptocurrency company. They'd done some research and found out that several other victims were organizing a class action lawsuit, and they thought I could either join that effort or file a separate suit on their behalf. They explained it like this was the obvious solution. I had a law degree. I understood their financial situation better than anyone, and I had a personal stake in getting their money back since it affected the whole family. They suggested that if I could recover even a portion of the $150,000, it might be enough to save the house and get them back on their feet. The problem is, I know enough about law to understand how these cases actually work. First, I just graduated and have zero experience with securities litigation or complex financial fraud cases. These cases require specialized knowledge and resources that I simply don't have. Second, most of the money in Ponzi schemes is already gone by the time they collapse. The chances of recovering any significant amount are usually pretty slim. Third, even if there was money to be recovered, it could take years of litigation, and my parents need help now. But the biggest issue is I don't think I can represent them objectively. I'm still incredibly angry about the whole situation. I feel like they manipulated me into giving up my career opportunity, and then they went behind my back and made the exact kind of irresponsible financial decision that got them into trouble in the first place. How am I supposed to advocate effectively for someone when I'm struggling not to resent them? I try to explain all of this to them, but they're not really hearing me. They keep saying things like, "You're the only one who can help us," and "this is what families do for each other." My mom has started crying every time we talk about it, and my dad just looks defeated. Stella calls from California every few days apologizing and saying she never meant for any of this to happen. But apologies don't exactly pay the mortgage. The worst part is I can see their perspective even though I'm angry. They're scared. They're facing bankruptcy. And they're grasping at any possible solution. From their point of view, having a lawyer in the family who could potentially help them recover their money probably seems like a miracle. They don't understand the practical and ethical complications of what they're asking me to do. Meanwhile, my own life is completely on hold. I should be working at that firm in New York right now, building my career and starting to pay down my loans. Instead, I'm living at home, watching my parents face financial ruin and being asked to somehow fix a situation that's probably unfixable. My student loan payments are going to start in a few months, and I have no income and no immediate prospects for employment. I've been thinking about just leaving, finding another job somewhere else, moving out, and letting them figure out their own mess. But I know if I do that and they lose their house, I'll feel guilty about it for the rest of my life. At the same time, I don't think I can keep sacrificing my future for their mistakes. The other option is to try to help them with the lawsuit, even though I know it's probably hopeless. Maybe I could find an experienced attorney who would take the case on contingency and let me assist as co-counsel. But that would mean committing to potentially years of litigation with no guarantee of success, all while my own career remains stalled. I guess what I'm asking is, am I wrong to feel angry about this? Should I be more sympathetic to my parents' situation and just do whatever I can to help them? Or is it reasonable for me to prioritize my own career and financial future? What would you do if your family asked you to sacrifice your professional future to fix a problem they created through their own poor decisions? I don't know anymore. I feel lost. And I feel guilty for feeling lost. These are my parents. They raised me and supported me through school, even if they couldn't pay for it all. But I also feel like they've taken advantage of my sense of loyalty and family obligation. I'm supposed to be starting my career right now, and instead I'm stuck in this impossible situation with no good options. Update 1. Well, things have gotten more complicated since my last post. I wasn't expecting so many responses, but reading them made me realize I needed to set boundaries with my parents. A lot of you pointed out I was being manipulated, which was hard to hear, but probably true. On Tuesday, I started researching real options. I looked up bankruptcy attorneys and spoke with a few who handle securities fraud to see if there was any chance of recovering my parents' money from the Ponzi scheme. The answers weren't encouraging. Every attorney said the same thing. Most of the money was gone. Litigation would take years, and even with a judgment, collecting would be next to impossible. One attorney offered contingency representation, but said we'd be waiting at least 2 years for any outcome. Bankruptcy, on the other hand, looked more promising. My parents could likely keep their house if they got current on the mortgage, and most of their unsecured debt, mainly credit cards, would be discharged. Given their income level, Chapter 7 was clearly an option. I presented all of this on Wednesday. I explained bankruptcy was the only realistic path, and that I couldn't ethically represent them in a fraud case this complex. They deserved a real attorney, not me fumbling through. That conversation went badly. My dad got angry, saying I was abandoning the family. He accused me of being selfish after everything they'd done for me. My mom cried, saying she felt like she was losing both her house and her son. Things got heated. I blurted out how angry I was that they'd hidden $150,000 from me, all while asking me to put my career on hold. I told them I felt manipulated and betrayed, that I couldn't understand how they could be so irresponsible. My dad shot back that they never asked me to reject the job offer. That was my choice. He said they'd only asked for help, not for me to sacrifice my future. My mom claimed they kept the money secret because they wanted to surprise me by paying off my student loans, and they never thought the investment would collapse. Nothing got resolved, and since then the house has been tense. I've been tempted to just pack up and leave, maybe start fresh in another city, but leaving while they're staring down bankruptcy feels like it would permanently damage things. And now there's Stella. She called yesterday with a new version of events. Turns out the friends who roped her into the crypto scheme weren't random. One was a guy she'd been dating. She even moved to California to be near him. She trusted his investment opportunity because she was in love. When the scheme collapsed, he vanished too. She tried filing a police report, but officers said it was a federal matter for the FBI. She's been trying to reach the Financial Crimes Unit, but hasn't gotten far. She also admitted she'd been living beyond her means, trying to match this guy's lifestyle. Her social media manager job was just freelance work that barely paid rent. She'd been covering expenses with credit cards and is now $25,000 in debt. She's asking if she can move back home to regroup. So here we are, my parents facing bankruptcy, me stuck at home with no job, and my sister broke and wanting to move back in. A perfect storm of financial disaster. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just taken that New York job and let everyone else sort themselves out. The one silver lining is that I've been talking to legal recruiters. The market's tough, but my Columbia degree opens doors. A few firms are interested in me for January starts. The salary aren't as high as the job I turned down, but still decent, around $140,000 to $160,000. It's not what I hoped for, but it's a chance to rebuild. This weekend, I plan to have another serious talk with my parents. I need to be clear about what I'm willing and not willing to do. I can help them find a good bankruptcy attorney and research options, but I won't represent them in a doomed lawsuit, and I won't keep sacrificing my career indefinitely. I just hope they can accept that helping doesn't mean destroying my own life. There has to be a middle ground between abandoning them and ruining my future over their mistakes. Update 2. Okay, so remember how I said things were complicated? They just got absolutely insane. I do not even know where to begin, but I will try to make sense of what happened. Stella came home Thursday night looking like she had been crying for weeks. The story she told us about California was worse than we thought, and after the investment scheme collapsed, she started getting threatening messages from people claiming she owed them money. She was scared and fled back with only what fit in her car. On Friday, she mostly slept and cried. As angry as I was about her decision, I also felt bad. She was obviously a victim. The guy she was dating and his so-called partners clearly targeted her because she had access to family money. Saturday morning, I was preparing to talk to my parents about boundaries when there was a knock at the door. 2 FBI agents asked to speak with Stella about the cryptocurrency scheme. That was when we learned the case was much bigger than we imagined. It was a multi-million-dollar fraud that hit hundreds of victims across several states. The FBI had been building the case for months and already had Stella flagged as a victim through seized records. They interviewed her for 3 hours, asking about the timeline of investments, her communications, and whether they could search her phone and computer. Then they told us the surprising part. They had already frozen several accounts and wallets tied to the scam. Victims might recover at least some of their money through asset forfeiture, though the process could take years. They also said Stella might have to testify if the case goes to trial. Several organizers had been arrested, but they were still looking for others, including Stella's ex. She was told to contact them if he reached out. After the agents left, my parents were stunned. For the first time in weeks, they looked hopeful, but only hours later, things took a bizarre turn. Stella got a call from an unknown number. It was her ex. He said he was in Mexico, that he was sorry, that he had been threatened by his partners. He claimed he never meant to hurt anyone and that he, too, was manipulated. He said he had information for the FBI and wanted Stella's help to arrange his surrender. Stella panicked and called me. I told her to hang up and contact the FBI. She did. The agents came back that evening. They said her ex was actually a primary target of their investigation, and his story about Mexico might not even be true. They were treating his contact as potential witness intimidation. They gave us security advice: watch our surroundings, avoid new routines, report anything suspicious. They did not think Stella was in serious danger, but they wanted us to be cautious until he was caught. Now we're worried about her safety. She barely sleeps and jumps at every sound. My parents are torn between hope that they might recover money and fear that their daughter is still connected to dangerous people. The investigation also complicated their bankruptcy situation. The agents told my parents not to file right away because any recovery could affect eligibility for debt discharge. They suggested waiting until the criminal case is solved, which could take many months. Meanwhile, the mortgage company is demanding payment. My parents are now 4 months behind. I called them to ask for options, but they said unless my parents catch up within 30 days, foreclosure is next. I started researching emergency bankruptcy filings and mortgage protection, trying to figure out if there's a way to stop foreclosure without running their chances of benefiting from the FBI recovery. It is complicated, and I feel out of my depth. Meanwhile, the legal recruiters I have been speaking with are pressing for answers. Some firms may have openings in January, but they need to know if I'm ready to relocate and commit. I explain my family's situation, but I can tell they are concerned about my ability to focus. It feels like a nightmare where every time we find an option, something new disrupts everything. The FBI's involvement and the possibility of recovery is encouraging, but it has added new risks we never anticipated. I'm realizing that I'm too emotionally involved to make clear decisions for everyone. I love my family, but I cannot put my life on hold forever while legal processes drag on. I need to make choices about my own future. I'm leaning towards accepting one of the January job offers. I cannot keep waiting for the situation to fix itself. My parents need to start owning their responsibilities. I will help them research and support them emotionally, but I cannot sacrifice my career any longer. It is hard not to feel guilty for prioritizing my own future when my family is in crisis. At the same time, I'm starting to accept that their problems are not mine to solve, especially since their mistakes created this mess in the first place. Update 3. I can barely believe what has happened over the past few days. Just when I thought things could not get any more complicated, everything took another unexpected turn. Yesterday morning, while I was on a call with a legal recruiter about a position in a new city, there was a knock at the door. This time, it was not the FBI, but a process server with a subpoena for Stella. She's been called to testify before a federal grand jury as part of the investigation into the investment scheme. The subpoena requires her to return to California next week. The FBI agents we have been working with called shortly after and explained this is routine. Stella is not in trouble, but her testimony will help establish the fraud's timeline and show how victims were recruited. She was terrified about going back, especially with her ex still at large, but the FBI promised she would have protection while testifying. They also said her cooperation could help speed up the asset recovery process for victims. While we were trying to process that, my dad got a call from his brother, Uncle Mike, who lives in Arizona. He had seen news coverage of the fraud case and our family's name mentioned. He wanted to check in and see if we were okay. Uncle Mike has always been successful. He built a construction company from scratch and turned it into a strong business. He has never flaunted money, but I knew he was financially secure. During the call, my dad, who usually keeps financial matters private, finally broke down and told him everything. He admitted to the mortgage problems, credit card debt, the investment losses, and the possibility of bankruptcy. He even mentioned that I had given up a job offer to come home and help. Uncle Mike listened quietly and then said he wanted to fly out to talk in person. He arrived yesterday afternoon after dinner. He gathered us all together and made an offer that completely changed everything. He said he would loan my parents enough to bring their mortgage current and pay off their credit card debt, about $60,000. It would be at zero interest with a 10-year repayment plan at whatever rate they could manage. He said he understood the risk and was fine with the possibility of never being repaid in full. But there were conditions. My parents would need to work with a financial advisor and create a realistic budget. They would have to promise not to make major financial decisions without consulting the advisor. I would need to commit to one of my job offers and move forward with my career rather than trying to manage their finances. Uncle Mike said he had watched our family struggle with money for years and believed the problem was not lack of income, but lack of discipline and planning. He stressed that my parents are good people, but make emotional decisions without learning from mistakes. He also said he was worried about me sacrificing my career for problems that were not mine to fix. He believed the best way for me to help long term was to build stability in my own life. My parents were overwhelmed and defensive. My dad said he did not appreciate being lectured by someone who had never struggled financially. Uncle Mike responded that he had started his company with $5,000 and a truck, and that he had made mistakes too. The difference was he learned from them. The conversation was tense, but in the end, my parents agreed. Losing the house would be worse than accepting his terms. Stella also agreed to testify before the grand jury. Uncle Mike even helped us find an attorney who specializes in federal criminal cases to prepare her. The attorney explained that cooperating with federal investigators often leads to better outcomes in asset recovery. So her testimony could eventually benefit everyone. Then Uncle Mike made me an offer I did not expect. He said that if I accepted a job and moved forward with my career, he would help me with student loan payments for the first 2 years. Not a full payoff, but enough to make things manageable. He called it an investment in the family's future. I felt guilty at first, but he reminded me that enabling bad decisions was exactly how our family ended up in this mess. That night I stayed awake thinking. This morning I called the recruiter for the position in the new city and told them I was ready. The job starts in January, pays $155,000 and focuses on corporate litigation. It is the right step for my career. I have realized Uncle Mike is right. My parents and Stella are not bad people, but they have never learned how to manage money responsibly. They react to problems instead of planning ahead. My trying to rescue them only enabled the cycle. Uncle Mike's approach, help with clear expectations and accountability, may finally push them to change. I'm still nervous about leaving, but for the first time in months, I feel hopeful. My parents now have a chance to stabilize their finances and avoid bankruptcy. Stella is cooperating with the FBI and has legal guidance, and I am finally starting the career I worked so hard for. The biggest lesson I have learned is that sometimes the best way to help family is not to fix everything for them, but to step back and build a stable foundation for yourself. That way, when they truly need support, you are in a position to provide it. Starting fresh is scary, but it feels like the right decision. My family will figure things out without me controlling every detail, and for once, I am finally focusing on my own goals. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.